Over the past 50 years, Brian De Palma has created a distinct body of work that undoubtedly qualifies him as one of the masters of cinema. Having directed 30 feature films within that time, he has a signature style all his own. Recently, four rising film directors and a distinguished journalist writer sat down in a virtual room to honor Brian De Palma and to pinpoint his greatest films and why you should see them.
These are tough questions, Terry. It's like saying what your favorite movie is. Brian De Palma is one of my favorite filmmakers and has been since I was a kid. My parents not only took me to see stuff like The Untouchables and other De Palma films that occurred throughout the 80s and 90s, like all right, for instance, like Carlito's Way. I was working at a movie theater in Smithtown, New York. It was a one-run theater, usually. Sometimes they played kids' films in the day. And Carlito's Way, it had a balcony. I would change the marquee, change the letters and the title. So I put Carlito's Way up on the marquee in front of the theater. And then when I would break, I would sit in the balcony and watch the movie. So I must have seen Carlito's Way, like even at that time, as many times as it ran when I was working. It was amazing. De Palma's range is it spans so diversely through so many different genres. And a lot of people don't know that, the guy made like 6 movies before he made anything that you even know about, that most people don't even know about. I didn't discover stuff like Hi Mom or Murder a la Mode until I was in film school in the 90s, but I grew up on De Palma films. I think the one that really stood out in my mind as a kid, well, two, my parents put on for me. And I'm a kid, mind you. We're not a teenager, not a preteen, a child. I saw Carrie and I saw Phantom of the Paradise when I was a little kid. Those might stand out for me as the early De Palma films, because I watched those full movies as a child. And then in the early 80s, I saw, and this is after I saw Carrie and Phantom of the Paradise, but I saw Terror in the Isles. And it exposed me to other De Palma films because there were little snippets of De Palma's movies, even like Dress to Kill and Blowout were in there, I believe. It got me. My mom was obsessed with De Palma and the De Palma ending and all of that stuff. I think I was truly exposed to De Palma as a signature artist even before Hitchcock, even though I did see Psycho and The Birds a lot as a kid, like I don't know. It was, and he's a continuance of his styles.
My favorite Brian De Palma movie has to be Scarface. Love Scarface. Just as a kid, in high school, I used to work at the public library in North Babylon. So they had me in the movie section to work at, which is the worst place you can put a director because you're just going to be, that's heaven for us, but you're not getting no work done. So I kept seeing this movie called Scarface, and the poster looked really dope. And I was like, what is this? And I looked at the back, and he just looked crazy. And I'm seeing Miami. So I rented the movie, and I saw it, and I loved it. And I was like, well, who's this director? And then, us as directors, who directors, we look them up, and we just look at the whole catalog, whatever. But yeah, Scarface is my favorite. I think because just the violence and just Al Pacino's performance, and then the soundtrack, the music was dope. Michelle Pfeiffer was just gorgeous. I'm saying, and it was just a rags to riches story, but it was just something we've seen those stories time and time again, but this was just different. The music, Al Pacino, just in it was just a different kind of movie, you know what I'm saying? And I think to me it's one of his best, you know what I'm saying? I could watch that on the loop, you know what I'm saying? I bought the 20th anniversary box set, and all behind the scenes. So that's like gold for us, so we could watch that, the director's commentary and everything. So that for me is my favorite, Brian De Palma film.
My favorite Brian De Palma movie is Dressed to Kill. And part of that is, I would say, nostalgic. And that's because that was the first De Palma movie I saw. And I saw it when I was 14 years old. And sort of blew me away and stunned me. I didn't know movies like this existed. So it's a nostalgic favorite, Dress to Kill, for that reason. But I also think it's my favorite because for me, Dress to Kill, and I realize this may be a controversial statement, but it's sort of a perfected version of Psycho. And that's no dig against Alfred Hitchcock. Alfred Hitchcock, obviously the progenitor of that kind of material and a genius, but he had to deal with a film system in 1960. And so he couldn't take things sort of to the limit of maybe where they could go. And, you know, 20 years later in 1980, Brian De Palma could do that. So he could show us more sex, more violence. He could misdirect us with those things more than Hitchcock could do in 1960. So it's like, obviously Psycho is a fantastic film, a great film, but what I love about Dress to Kill is that it sort of takes the ethos of Psycho and says, look what I can do with this now. Look how I can distract you. Look how I can seduce you with the camera, with all the freedoms we now have in cinema, you know, that Hitchcock was not allowed to employ those many years ago. So for me, Dress to Kill, even though I know for some people in 2021, it'll be problematic, because of the nature of the killer. And some people might see that as a negative social statement, although I don't think it's meant that way. It's still a nostalgic favorite and a favorite for me of De Palma's work.
My favorite De Palma movie is Scarface, and it's always been my favorite De Palma movie. And it's funny because I always had a Scarface poster on my wall. This is when I was a bachelor. I wasn't married at the time. And I had a action figure of Tony Montana. And it's funny because it's like, it's one of those rare movies where, and I'm one of those guys that doesn't like a lot of profanity in his movies, even though I swear like a sailor in my personal life. But for some reason, that movie, if you take out all the F-bombs, the movie is almost incoherent. And I remember it was on like TNT or something like that. And it was just like this movie where it was just like, I think they changed the F word to a different word or something like that. I cannot remember, but it was hilarious. But there's something about that movie that it's interesting because it's a movie that doesn't really have necessarily somebody to root for in the classic sense. You know, maybe Tony Montana's sister or maybe Michelle Pfeiffer's character, you kind of root for them a little bit. But in general, everyone's despicable in that movie. But every time it's on, I've always loved that movie. I really like the Giorgio what's his name? Giorgio Moroder. Yeah, it's always been one of my favorites. So I would definitely say that's probably my number one. Even though a lot of people, it's interesting because I think now it's probably more famous than maybe when it was initially released. I think, you know, it's kind of grown a fan base over the years. And but yeah, it's always been one of my favorites.
You know, I think Carrie is almost a perfect movie. It's about as close as you can get. I think The Untouchables was really well done, very successful. He kind of subverted a little bit of his style a little bit just to kind of get to mainstream filmmaking, but yet it was still very much him. And of course, I love Blowout. I love Dress to Kill, even Scarface. But for me, there was one film that stood out above all the other ones. It's interesting because I don't ever hear anybody talk about it. And I don't know why. But when I think of this film, I think of it as kind of his Scarface, but more mature. It's a 2.5-hour movie. The acting's off the hook. What I like about it versus, say, Scarface, and I haven't said the name on purpose yet, you know, Scarface is a little more like obvious, loud, obnoxious, a little bit with the swearing, and, you know, it's really violent. But this one to me is a little more cerebral, maybe more mature, and that's Carlito's Way. I think Carlito's Way is an absolute masterpiece. I think when you look at what Al had done in Scarface with De Palma, and then about 10 years later, almost exactly, they make this story was about a guy who was kind of a gangster as well, but he wanted to get out of it instead of like take over and show his power and money. And he was kind of like trying to get away from it, but yet it was keeping him back in. This, to me, it's an epic, like Scarface is. But I love that there's a really tender love story with him and Penelope Ann Miller's character. And then you have Sean Penn playing his lawyer.
Oh, Sean Penn's great in it. Huh?
Oh, Sean Penn was amazing. He looked like
total transformation too.
He looked like a Jewish lawyer, right? And I like the relationship that he had with Pacino's character, with Carlito. And he had Luis Guzman playing like his right-hand man, who, as we know, kind of double crosses him. And then John Leguizamo was playing Benny from the Bronx, who was this kind of up and like Carlito used to be.
Yeah.
And it's got violence, and it's got like all the De Palma touches with everyone's wearing really fancy clothes. It's shot by Stephen Burham, who shot so many of De Palma's films. It's scored by a different composer, which is Patrick Doyle. I think his score is really beautiful. It's tragic, it's mature, it's got that love romantic angle to it. I think De Palma is at his peak on that film.
Because he was making incredible films like throughout his career. Like, all right, like as a kid, we loved Carrie. We would watch it all the time. Phantom of the Paradise, I would watch all the time. But then we really got into Untouchables. I saw that in the theater when it first came out. My folks took me to see it. And he just kept knocking them out of the park. I know he had a real bad valley, Bonfire of the Vanities, but I'm not very familiar with that film. I'm familiar with the things that I was excited about seeing. I mean, I love some of his modern films, but, Carlito's Way was a fantastic movie. Quite different than Scarface, kind of covering the same genre. It could be Carlito's Way. Mission to Mars was a nice try. There were some really beautiful things about it. Such a gorgeous score and a style, and this, hugely sympathetic to the Sinise character, and it just didn't all come together in the end with the Mars stuff for me. It could have been absolutely incredible, but I don't know why it wasn't. You never really know why unless you were there from beginning to end. It would be an interesting study to see the films that almost were masterpieces, but that certainly wasn't. Yeah, maybe Carlito's Way. I'm a fan of Passion, and that came much later. I saw that in a Hong Kong cinema. I was obsessed with seeing it, and it wasn't really playing anywhere in the States. I went to Hong Kong for a little while, and it was playing there in the cinema, so I was obsessed with going. I had to go. I knew this was a new De Palma thriller. Regardless of what anyone was saying in some of the trade magazines, I really didn't care. I wanted to see it, and I felt like it was classic De Palma. But for, people who really know his work would only understand that. Someone may have seen Carrie, someone may have seen Scarface. These are all different films. They're so different from each other. There's still, if you know what to look for, you can see that signature style, or him bouncing between Pino Donaggio and Morricone and composers like that. There's consistency through his work, but he just goes to so many different genres, and you kind of have to just be on board with the artist.
A movie I saw the first time I saw this movie in the theater had to be Mission Impossible. That movie, when that came out, it was like everywhere. You know what I'm saying? You saw all the posters, I bought the book, I bought the book before I saw the movie, and I was just obsessed with it. It was just something about the poster. I don't know why. But then when I saw the film, it was just dope. The stunts was incredible. The shot, the scene where Tom Cruise, has to like infiltrate into the building and drop down, and how they shot it. He's sweating, and the floor has the sensor. So if they feel anything, the alarm goes off, and then he's sweating, and it drops right on his glasses. And if you ever watch like behind the scenes DVD, whatever, just the way they had to shoot that and everything was just so much preparation. If Tom Cruise dropped and they just missed it by an inch, he was going to be injured really bad. So for them to do that, test that out, the timing, the camera work, everything. To me, that scene and that movie in general, I think it's his best technique for me.
I realize this is probably boring and sounding a repetitive note, and I won't do it again, but I think technically Dressed to Kill is Brian De Palma's greatest film. It's not just a personal favorite. I think it's legitimately and genuinely a great work of the cinema and his finest technical work. And some of the reasons for that, I think, his use of the mirror and the reflection motif throughout the film, that when Bobby the killer personality threatens to emerge, we get like these mirror shots of Michael Caine, and you don't know what that means the first time, but you do the second time. Again, he's so good at layering stuff on like that. We get these mirror shots, and those mirror or reflection shots, they're not just related to Michael Caine's character, like in his office when he's in the therapy session, and you get like the shots of the mirror looking at him. But like the murder scene in the elevator and with the razor, the mirror at the end when in Nancy Allen's dream, we have this whole mirror world in Dressed to Kill, this whole mirror motif that I think speaks to his ability to use symbols and abstract ideas and to get forward that idea of sort of the other self and the other world brilliantly. And I think that's so beautiful in Dressed to Kill. But it's not just that. I think my favorite scene in the film, and I show it to my film classes, probably to their dismay, but at the college I teach, I show them the art museum Seduction with Angie Dickinson writing her notes down, get Thanksgiving turkey and stuff like that. And a man sits down next to her and she's attracted to him and she takes off a glove and realizes she's revealed her ring and he gets up and leaves. That is an opera of sort of sensuality in 10 minutes. It's a perfect 10-minute sequence. And in the way then that she gets up and starts to pursue him, and the way the camera sort of corners so we don't know what's around the next corner, and then we see what's around the next corner, and we're following and it's building up this sense in us of anticipation and excitement and suspense. I mean, I don't think it gets any better than that. I mean, I think, again, De Palma he has figured out how to use all of the instruments in the orchestra to make us feel something. And whether you agree with this or not, I mean, it's this idea of seduction and lust and this game, this cat and mouse game. And again, he's seducing us into following that. We're going around the corners, we're watching, there's the artwork all around. There are people we're seeing, we're looking for the object of her affection, the man, and he's looking for her. But what's really going on is that she's the pursued, not the pursuer, by the killer. So again, there are layers upon layers there in Dressed to Kill. And I just don't think you could sort of come across a more technically perfect scene or really film in his filmography than Dressed to Kill. And I go back to thinking about Hitchcock, because obviously Angie Dickinson's characters are Janet Leigh in this movie, the character who we're following and whom we don't expect to die. In the first third. And I think about, if Hitchcock could have done that, if he could have had the opening scenes in Psycho with Sam Loomis and Marion Crane, if cinema had been different in the 60s, I feel like this is something he could have done. He could have made us feel that idea of seduction and anticipation the way that maybe De Palma was able to, and De Palma just did it brilliantly. So again, here I am arguing for Dressed to Kill as a real pinnacle of Brian De Palma's career.
And that's a really tough one. I mean, I think that a lot of people really think Carrie is kind of his all-time masterpiece. If you think about it, I would say the movie is more famous than the book. And I know I might get rocks thrown at me for saying that. It's one of those rarities where the movie is just kind of considered a masterpiece kind of early in his filmography, and it kind of established a lot of the style that he then does later on in his other movies. But it feels like its own thing. Like it definitely, and it's just one of those movies that you watch it every Halloween or around that. It's just a classic. But yeah, I mean, when I think of probably his jewel, I would say it's Carrie, because it's almost a perfect movie. I mean, what would you change in it? I always kind of look at movies like, obviously it's Spielberg, but Raiders of the Lost Ark is like my favorite movie of all time. And I always say, what would you change? And if you can't think of anything, then that means it's probably a perfect movie. It kind of established, it was his first breakout movie. And I think that it kind of established a lot of the stylistic choices he made in later movies like Dressed to Kill or Body Double, or even Blowout, which all came a few years later. So I'll go with Carrie. And it's one of those few movies that works with the split screen, because like the split screen thing doesn't always work for me. And for some reason that movie, it manages to, because sometimes split screens don't work because you're like, well, what do I focus on? And that movie, you can still focus on what's happening. There's enough of understanding of the geography that the split screen still works.
This is probably the one I struggled with the most, because I think that you can make an argument for many different films that he made. I don't know if you'd put Bonfire of the Vanities there, but for some reason it came back to Carlito's Way for me, because it has the acting performances, it has the visual look without being showy, it's got the beautiful score. It was not a cheap budget movie, so it was a pretty big film. I know it was based on 2 novels that a judge wrote. I just think that he's never been better than that. For me, as good as Carrie is, as great as Blowout is, etc., Body Double, Scarface, Touchables, I think that was his pinnacle. It's his best film.
most bizarro movie is Phantom of the Paradise, and it's lovely, and I believe it predates Rocky Horror Picture Show. You know, it's De Palma's really weird, at that time, modernized take on Phantom of the Opera, or a Faustian tale, of course, because that's all embedded in the original text. It's a musical, but done right. You know, it's a rock and roll fantasy, I believe, as the tagline says. But De Palma, the way I could describe him is somebody who was in love with the language of cinema and made a point not to waste any time. And I believe he had even said this at one point, that, you know, he never understood movies that waste any time. You have such a short period of time to tell a story in a motion picture. Why would you waste any time? And I don't mean, you know, this fast-paced, kinetic film. That's not necessary. But don't waste time. You're here entertaining an audience. You need to tell that story strong. Everything should be strong. Even if it's subtle, it still should be strong. You know what I mean? I believe he's always adhered to that. There's always been something interesting, regardless if the film may have been a failure overall. But you have to be along for the ride, and you have to be along for his changes if you are truly an admirer of De Palma. Like Black Dahlia. What an ambitious... I think it was pretty much the same team that made Carlito's Way. You know, collective team, and you and I have talked about teams. It's like a band. Well, it was the same band. Well, what happened? Was it the script? Was it some miscasting? You know, there's some solid actors in that movie, but it wasn't overall bad. There was some fantastic, some beautiful, gorgeous sequences, right? But it didn't gel overall for some reason. Yeah. And when you read these interviews with De Palma, it seems like what we saw was intentional. You know, he wanted to make what he read in the book, and that was his interpretation at the time. So, and in De Palma's case, yes.
It was different because I love comedies. He doesn't do a lot of comedies. Wise Guys. So Wise Guys is different. If you look at SNL Fanatic, you know, Joe Piscopo, I can never say his name right, but Joe Piscopo, that was like Eddie Murphy's right-hand man on Saturday Night Live for a long time. You know, that caught my eye. So it's like, but I didn't know as a kid that was Brian, De Palma's film. Then you get older, you know what I'm saying? You start looking up names. But to me, it's the most interesting film because the comedy is not something with a lot of action or it's dark. It's just something lighthearted and funny. It was a nice little film, you know what I'm saying? It's not one of those films a lot of people talk about, you know what I'm saying? But that's the film I have to pick.
I believe the most interesting film in Brian De Palma's career is actually Blowout. And the reason I say that is in part because of the film and in part because of where America has come in the last 10, 15 years. I think what we see and hear in Blowout is this idea of art, whether you want to talk about the sound aspect of it or film, the visual aspects of it, being manipulated by politics to reveal something or hide something. And certainly if you look at this idea of film being used to manipulate people into believing certain things or to vote a certain way, Blowout is very important in our understanding of that. I mean, what this is about basically is, an attempt to take out a presidential candidate who will be difficult to defeat later on. And the discovery of that conspiracy. And of course, we all know, we live in a society these days, that is absolutely consumed, unfortunately, with conspiracy theories. But I think this film is very forward-looking, with its imagery of Americana and the flag, with its idea of somebody like getting to the truth. I think that Blowout has all these symbols of Americana, follows on Watergate, but it sort of precedes some of the later things that have gone on culturally in America. You've got the American flag, fireworks, things like that, all these symbols of who we are as a country. But beneath that, contrasted with that, juxtaposed with that, is a murderous conspiracy, is a conspiracy to hold and control power. And end of that film to me is just devastating, where they're using the scream of this real life person, this victim of the conspiracy, in a cheapo horror movie, as the scream in a horror movie. And to me, that is just sort of Palma's, his gallows humor, but also it's a tragedy. I mean, it's ironic humor. It's not funny humor. It's tragic and terrible. And to me, it's like about the death of the American dream, because it's like you can use sound, you can use pictures, and you can make people believe anything, things that aren't true. That may be, the greatest message to come out of a De Palma film. I mean, I don't think that maybe we're as tuned in as much to that in the 1980s as we would be now watching that film. But certainly if you go back and watch that film today, you think, oh my gosh, it just sort of forecasts everything. I mean, not necessarily the sound, but if you think about a corollary for that, like how Photoshop can be used, how deep fakes can be used. It's saying, the channels of power will use these things. They'll use sound, they'll use the cinematic arts to sway you, to convince you, to make you believe something that maybe you didn't believe, an untruth that you take for a truth. So I think, although it's not my personal favorite De Palma film for, again, personal reasons, I think that his most interesting film, and the one that has maybe stood the best over time, is indeed Blowout.
Blowout and Dress to Kill both kind of, it's funny because they kind of feel back to back to me just because they both have Nancy Allen. I love Body Double. Body Double is actually one of the first that I ever saw. It was entirely by mistake. It was on a VHS tape that my uncle gave me. And I think he recorded, he gave me a tape with The Keep or something like that, the Michael Mann film. And then if you just kept watching the tape, all of a sudden Body Double would come on, and I was very young, and that first scene, it's got some nudity, and I was like, all right, well, what is this? And so Body Double it's almost like it's Rear Window sexuality and all that kind of thing. So it's different from the Hitchcock film. It's interesting because whenever it's on, I always watch it. But yeah, man, it's hard to tell, man. Dress to Kill is interesting, but you can never make Dress to Kill now because of just the gender politics of it all, and the fact that the killer is transgender, and there's just some things in there that they just couldn't get away with now. Blowout is interesting because of, especially if you're interested in making movies and the aspect of recording audio, and basically it's like a Americanized version of Blow Up. But so I don't know, it's hard to pick one of those three, but I mean, Body Double I have a soft spot for, just because it was always it was just there, and I could watch it, and I was kind of like, I don't think I'm supposed to have this. I was very young. I was like, I don't know if I should be watching this. But the guy with the big drill in that movie scared the crap out of me as a kid.
Oh yeah, he had that face, right?
Yeah, it was the prosthetic, and it incorporates 80s pop music and all that. It's a very interesting movie.
It's got to be Blowout. Because it's got that, it's almost, to me, almost about filmmaking. Sound recordist records this crime that ends up being a murder.
Mm-hmm.
And the way De Palma tells that story, it's so cool because it's got like a dreamy quality to it. And he does a lot of his famous cinematic tricks with split screen and split diopters and a lot of camera movement. That one scene where John Travolta comes in looking for the tapes, and the camera does this 360-degree movement. It's basically recording time over like 15-20 minutes where he's trying to find it.
Mm-hmm.
It was so brilliantly done by not only the operator Vilmos Zsigmond, right, or the DP, one of the best in Hollywood in history. The music, probably Travolta's best role,
Absolutely.
maybe Nancy Allen's best role, one of the best roles that John Lithgow, who's got this dual personality, which is very De Palma, right? And they shot it in Philadelphia, which is really interesting to me. When people think of De Palma, I think they usually think of him as New York. He's from Philly.
Interesting.
Really in his hometown. I find that really, because he said he knew where like the owl was by the bridge with the water, and the car, goes in the water. He knew those places because he grew up in Philly.
And so is the kind of red, white, and blue motif of the movie visually, right?
Yes.
Does that have to do with Philly, do you think?
I think it has to do with it's the city of the Declaration of Independence, kind of like our historic kind of founding city. You've got the fireworks at the end. So it's supposed to take place around the 4th of July. So I think it's very much he's coordinating into that a lot of different ways. And it's beautiful that way. Don't you agree? It's like really brilliant.
Stunning looking movie. Yeah. It looks
And
great.
it sounds stunning, right? It's kind of like The Conversation and Dress to Kill
and Blow Up.
Blowout rolled into one, right? One of his favorite movies, right?
You gotta sit and think about it. Well, in the advent of Blu-ray special editions, it's changed my answer. My answer could have been in the past, maybe Phantom of the Paradise, which was largely forgotten. Obsession was forgotten for a while. Wasn't really talked about. Blowout was kind of re-celebrated. So you have to go back 20 years and ask me that question, and I'd probably say Blowout, Phantom of the Paradise, stuff like that, because had a huge commercial success with Mission Impossible. And that's what got him like these larger films, hopeful, commercial success like Mission to Mars and things like that. Snake Eyes, they were hoping for another type of Mission Impossible out of that, and he made a De Palma film. Again, that's a great movie. I liked it. I saw it in the theater when it came out. He spent a lot of time on that opening sequence, and it doesn't necessarily mean it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, his most underrated one that a lot of people don't talk about. I first saw this movie or heard about it when it came out. This used to be a show called, or a network called E. I don't know if you remember that E. And E on Saturday had this show where they would show upcoming trailers. It was just a show about trailers coming out, whatever. And I saw this trailer called Snake Eyes with Nicolas Cage. And at the time, Face Off and Kanye, so I was a Nicolas Cage fanatic. And I got to see that movie. But I couldn't see it in the movie theater. It wasn't until, again, I was working at the library in North Babylon. I saw the video and I rented it, not knowing it was Brian De Palma's film. I just saw Nicolas Cage. And there was something cool about the poster. The jacket that Nicolas Cage had was kind of like this kind of, Libra print. I was like, what is this movie? It's supposed to be in Vegas, whatever. So that was like really, really dope. With suspense, and he's trying to, there's a fight, there's a boxing match going on at the same time. He's trying to solve a case, and every minute counts. And it was just, I think the way they shot it too, they had to they shot it and everything as like in real time from what I remember. So that's his most underrated one, because a lot of people don't talk about that. A lot of people don't even talk about that movie for Nicolas Cage, you know what I'm saying, as well. So, but that movie was just, it's good to this day, you know what I'm saying? It's one of his most underrated.
I think that De Palma's most underrated film is actually Carlito's Way. I think it's underrated because De Palma, and I'm not sure why this is the case, people tend to look at him as like, they look at Scorsese as the gangster guy, but De Palma, of course, has Scarface, which, has reached the pinnacle of pop culture. It's a touchstone, right? But Carlito's Way doesn't seem to have gotten there. It's like, people seem to think it's a substandard Scorsese effort or something like that. But De Palma is really good in that mode with that movie. I mean, I think there was some controversy too about casting Al Pacino, in an ethnic role that didn't match his own, ethnicity. But I think it's really underrated. It's a highly suspenseful film, and it has a very direct and I think affecting through line, which is about this guy who really does not want to get back into something he knows is bad, and he's learned all his lessons. And he's like not the guy wanting to go back into crime, and yet he gets back in, and he tries so hard to get out. He tries so hard for that sliver of happiness, and you end up rooting for him like all the way along to get that sliver. And at some point, there's this relentless, merciless drive in the film, because he's not gonna. I mean, the opening scene, of course. I mean, it's the opening scene sort of lets you know that it's not going to happen, but still, by the time you get to that very suspenseful train chase and chase through Grand Central Station, and even though what's going to happen, you're just hoping he is going to make it, because that's all he wants. And again, the story there, it's actually like this lawyer, it's this white collar guy who sort of drags him into this, and his undoing, I think, is very interesting, in terms of the socio-political commentary. But, outside that, for me, Carlito's Way is just this really emotionally affecting story about this guy who is in love and wants to have a future. And because of where he's come from, he can't get it. And, if you look at other gangster films, which I love, and I recently rewatched Goodfellas, which is great, Scorsese's Goodfellas, or Scarface. Tony in Scarface, I mean, he's a pretty despicable character. He doesn't have a lot of positives to him, and even in Goodfellas, you're looking at Joe Pesci's character, or Ray Liotta's character, or Robert De Niro's character. They're paranoid. It's fascinating, because it's like watching a Greek tragedy or a Shakespearean tragedy or something. But you get to Carlito's Way, and to me, it is just really this story of this guy that you end up really caring about, and you want him to get out. And you think of De Palma as the like sophisticated filmmaker. He's the sophisticated guy. He's going to be doing all these things and tricking you and making you see things in a different way. It is a sophisticated film in terms of a lot of things, but it's also a very simple film in terms of a lot of things, and that emotional through line is incredibly strong, and I just love it. Carlito's Way is one of my favorite movies of all time, and I just think it's highly underrated. I think people have missed what a great and emotionally affecting story Carlito's Way is.
I would say Raising Cain is the most underrated for me. And in fact, it was one of those movies that my dad took me to when I was like, I think I was almost 13 when I saw that in the theater. And I remember just being so excited to see it just because I saw the commercials with John Lithgow. John Lithgow continues to be one of my favorite actors of all time, because the thing about John Lithgow is that it's like you could go, he does Harry and the Hendersons, and then he does Raising Cain, and you're like, this guy, yeah, right. Like, how many actors can do that, right? So it's like, it's impressive to me that how versatile, and that movie really shows, it's a showcase for John Lithgow, because he's playing like multiple characters, different personalities, and it's interesting. And not many people, I think it bombed at the box office, but it was probably the last De Palma psychological thrillers of that ilk. He made Passion, which was later Femme Fatale and stuff like that, but this was kind of like the last of, I would say, like Body Double or Dressed to Kill.
I could make an argument for a couple of his movies, like Body Double, which I really loved. I saw it in the theater. Great songs in it that I still remember to this day. Some of those songs and that Steadicam shot following Deborah Shelton around the little mall thing, and some of those suspense scenes. And then who could forget Holly Body, Melanie Griffith's character, which was very De Palma. And I think he said that he actually tried to push the sex in that because he got critically lambasted by Scarface and maybe even a little bit on Dressed to Kill and stuff. So he was trying to push that angle. I actually think that his most underrated film, even though it's fairly recent, it's got to be Passion. It's, for those people that have not seen it, because just like we talked about with Cronenberg, a lot of times film fans will kind of tune out directors as they get older. Maybe they do some stuff that they don't quite like, so then they stop watching. So I honestly had not seen this film until I did my research for this tribute.
Yeah, it did kind of fall under the radar.
Yeah, and what's crazy is I think it had like a $20 million budget, and it only made like 1.5 million.
Yeah, and it was interesting because at that time, Rachel McAdams was a big star, and
Naomi Rapace or whatever her name is,
also a big star.
And I would also say that for the people out there that are not seen it and have been hesitant to do so, they should see it because it is De Palma like to the core.
Yeah,
double crossing, suspense, very sexual, scenes where there's no dialogue and you're just getting cinematic storytelling. It's really, and it's well acted, right?
Oh, the acting's great.
And there's a lot of twists. I think it's the best movie he's made in the last 20 years. So for me, most underrated is Passion, maybe followed by Body Double, and then maybe even Raising Cain.
Sissy Spacek and Carrie is amazing. Sean Connery and The Untouchables, Al Pacino and Scarface, even though it's way over the top. John Cassavetes exploding in Fury. That was a great performance. Gary Sinise was great in Mission to Mars, even though it wasn't. Oh, Sean Penn in Casualties of War. Absolutely amazing. Pacino in Carlito's Way, Sean Penn in Carlito's Way. I think he was nominated for an Academy Award for that. And that's what revived Sean Penn's career because remind you, he disappeared slightly for a minute. He was in a lot of trouble. He was punching out photographers and stuff like that. And then he shows up as this, because he was the bad boy up until then outside of Jeff Spicoli and Ridgemont. He disappears for a minute, and then he comes back and he's got this perm wig on and he's playing this whacked out, coked out lawyer in Carlito's Way. And it's really what revived him as a solid character actor.
He's worked with a lot of heavyweights. Al Pacino, Nicolas Cage, you got Tom Cruise, you got Kevin Costner, but I think the best acting performances on all his films have to be Sean Connery in Untouchables. You know what I'm saying? He was just, it's always good, but this is that was like my favorite performance, whatever, you know what I'm saying? And, when he died, it was just like, oh my God, you know what I'm saying? Even that, how he pulled it off, that performance, you felt it. So, but yeah, Sean Connery, all of them were great. Every actor he's worked with the best, you know what I'm saying? But Sean Connery, rest in peace, was like, he's an icon. You know what I'm saying? He's the man. And he's James Bond. So.
And I really had to think about that because there are so many great performances. There's John Travolta in Blowout. There's Al Pacino in Carlito's Way. But I really thought about it, and I thought about my love of horror, and I actually went back to very early De Palma, and I had to go back to Carrie, and I had to go back to Sissy Spacek. I love Carrie the film. I think it is a fantastic film. It's a great horror movie, one of the greatest of the 70s. The story doesn't always work 100% for me because it's like, Carrie goes, it's going Carrie at the prom, whatever you want to call it. It's like, oh, she finally snaps and goes, but what are we supposed to think of her? She's been victimized and hurt, treated so poorly, and so she breaks and becomes a murderer. What does the story really think about her? Was she justified or not justified in what happened there? In the book, I have a bit of a problem sort of with that, but I don't have it in terms of the movie. And the difference in the movie is Sissy Spacek, and it's her performance. And I think the sensitivity of that performance, that even as she goes into her split screen telepathic murder spree, even as that happens, we still care about her, and that we see it more as an explosion of anger and rage and empowerment even than as she's a monster. In lesser hands, I don't know that would have worked. And I'm not 100% sure it works in the book. Forgive me, Stephen King fans. Please don't write me evil letters or attack me on the internet. But Sissy Spacek makes the movie work. She makes the character work. Now, what De Palma did, the split screen, like her eyes to the action with the split, that's genius. I mean, that is utterly genius. The what I call the sting in the tail at the end, one of the greatest endings in horror film history. I mean, we'll talk about a psychic wallop you get at the end of that film. You walk out of the theater and you're shaking. It's like, holy cow, that got me. And again, you look at it now and it's like, why does it still get me? But it even when it's coming, it works. The opening in the gym, Carrie, in the locker room. Oh gosh, I mean, it's a great film. De Palma was perfect for it, but ultimately he still would have been perfect for it. But if he had not had Sissy Spacek in that role, I'm not sure it would have worked and become the cultural icon touchstone that it is. If she hadn't been able to manage that major twist in the plot. It is an early masterpiece, but again, I think that the question has to be, and especially because we do have like violence like this in our culture that's not normally wielded by a woman, but people who are derided, people who are outsiders, people who are dismissed and not acknowledged, and then come back in rage and are turned violent. Like, our culture doesn't tend to sympathize with them. We'll blame, it's the video game's fault, or it's this person's fault or whatever, but we don't really sympathize. And I think that for Carrie's story to work, you have to have some sympathy for what she went through, and yet she still have to have that act of violence. And at one point, I mean, that act of violence hurts the only person who's been decent to her, the only people in her life who have been good to her. But again, you still have to not hate her. To me, that is the magic of Sissy Spacek's performance in that film, is that even though she can be terrifying, when she pivots her head and those eyes land on you, it's like, watch out. But there's still something very human about her.
Sean Connery in The Untouchables, maybe. I mean, The Untouchables is such a great movie, and it's one of those, again, it doesn't quite get, it gets praised and it's highly acclaimed. However, when you think De Palma, you don't necessarily think The Untouchables, maybe. I you know what I'm saying? Like, because it was a TV show prior to that. So it has a kind of a mainstream, it's the same thing like the Bonfire of the Vanities movie. It's like it was based on a book. Like Dress to Kill, Body Double, and those movies are like so just pure De Palma. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
I would have to say Connery for the Untouchables.
Whether it be Lithgow playing three parts in Raising Cain, or Sissy Spacek and Carrie. You might say, Travolta and Blowout. You could say Pacino and Scarface. Any one of the actors in The Untouchables, or Penn and Carlito's Way. For me, it's got to be Al in Carlito's Way. He's got the voiceover. He's got the scenes where he's mad. He's got the scenes where he's in love. He's got the scenes where he's embarrassed, where he's trying to get away from the crime. I know that may seem like an obvious choice, but he's so doggone good. He's got so many layers, does all of them so well. For me, it worked, especially when you think about that movie. Think about this. They start out with him getting shot. So you already know whatever you see in the next 2.5 hours, this guy's going to die.
And let me ask you this about that. Do you forget?
Yeah, because you get lost. You get lost.
Yeah, because
I completely forgot. You get back to Grand Central Station and, he's trying to get on the train with his Penelope Ann Miller.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, Leguizamo comes up. But you know, when you go
And then
back
you,
to,
and was that the moment where you're like, oh yeah,
then you're like, okay,
Benny Blanco from the Bronx.
yes. And you know what's so great about that opening scene is think about the way De Palma stylized that. He shoots it kind of like with no cuts, and it just stays on Al, and I think it goes upside down, and they take away the color, so it goes kind of black and white or kind of desaturated.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got that beautiful score by Patrick Doyle. You don't even know what it means. And it's so beautiful seeing this guy basically die. And then you go back to a story. And I just think the fact that De Palma could do that, get away with it, and make you forget it, and then all of a sudden it comes together in the end. That's incredible. I think that was Al. Obviously, the script by David Coep or whatever did Jurassic Park.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest of his team. We got to give Marty Bregman some credit. I mean, look,
Great
he did
producer.
Scarface with De Palma. He did that, you know, Carlitos with De Palma.
I love the scene where John Travolta's recording, you know, the Chappaquiddick type crash sequence, because he's out there getting sounds for a horror film. He's getting these wild sounds, and you see the owl. I love how it's constructed with the split field diopter, and you're seeing the owl, and you're seeing the bridge, and you're hearing the wind in the trees. This is the first thing that came to mind. So I would say that sequence in Blowout is just beautiful.
I think the one that stands out the most, because I just like the way he shoots violence, has to be that scene on Untouchables at the table with the baseball bat. That was just like, you know, one, at first you're watching the scene, you're like, okay, and then it starts to take a left. You're like, where is this going? You're like, oh, this guy did something. Rob De Niro does the classic performance with the baseball bat and just kind of bashes the guy's head in. But then it's that shot, every shot when you see like the blood pouring out the guy's head and the din table and stuff like that, and the camera's just pulling away. That to me, it's like, that was dope. You know what I'm saying? So he knows how to shoot violence, you know what I'm saying, in a way that's different, you know what I'm saying? So
I'm going to answer your question. You asked me for a shot, and I'm totally passing the buck to a sequence, because I think in terms of De Palma, it's like the montage. It's the montage. And again, I show clips from De Palma films in my film class. I teach when it runs, I teach a survey of film. And, you know, I have chapters on editing and things like that. And so I want to like show examples of editing. The sequence that I picked, you know, I actually have a tie here, but the one I pick and the one I show my class, the sequence for De Palma that I pick is the Untouchables. And it's the staircase sequence with the baby carriage. Now, obviously there are cinematic antecedents for that. I get it. Again, it shows how sophisticated Brian De Palma is. You know, this becomes an homage to that, but it goes further than you know, Potemkin. It's beyond that. And the reason I show that to my students is to show how the scene builds, like the views of the clock, you know, and then back on Kevin Costner's eyes, and then on the exits on the ledge as people walk out and the train starts letting people out, and then like looking down and there's this woman slowly and infuriatingly trying to move that baby carriage, and which she just moved the damn carriage, you know, and he's leaning over the edge and you can practically see the sweat coming down, and how it builds suspense, because that scene could have just been a simple shootout. Elliot Ness arrives, the guy gets off the train, there's the shootout, and it's over. But instead, De Palma pulled out that moment and made it this huge thing, and this huge suspenseful moment that made us feel the danger of it. But I show it to my class, to get back to what I was saying, is not just to show the editing and how you can put these separate pieces of film together to build suspense like this, but I also showed them to show them that like a mainstream movie, like a blockbuster movie, can do these things. It can still be cinematic. It doesn't have to be stupid. It doesn't have to be lowest common denominator. That, you know, Untouchables was like a huge hit, summer of '87, big mainstream blockbuster, but in it you have like this absolute virtuoso doing his thing. And again, it's not like this gigantic action scene. It's this small moments, like this baby is in the way of what's going to be, you know, a massacre, and this good man doesn't want that baby and that mother to get hurt, and so it's about his character. It's about building the suspense. And again, to have that in a mainstream blockbuster, that's what we should have in our blockbusters. Like, you know, people are so concerned. It's like we need, you know, 50 people with jets on their backs, you know, flying in, shooting laser beams at an army of people with wings, and, you know, and we're gonna have this CGI shot where we swoop in on. It's like, no. No, don't do that. Like, let's do what De Palma did. Let's set up the scene, make it suspenseful, and pull out these human moments to make them bigger. I mean, I have a tie, but I'm talking about Untouchables first, because I would probably maybe give it the slight edge there, because again, it's like De Palma we don't think of in blockbuster mode necessarily. He's not necessarily but maybe we think about him in terms of horror, thriller, or gangster. It's like maybe those are the sort of three categories for him, right? Yet here we are in blockbuster mode, as he then went on to do with Mission Impossible, some years later, almost 10 years later. Here he is in blockbuster mode, but he's not half-assing it. He's not a hack. This isn't a paycheck job. And the proof of that, I mean, through the whole movie, but look at that one scene. Look at that montage. Look at the editing in that sequence with the staircase and the baby carriage. I mean, it is a brilliant sequence where you least expect to have a brilliant sequence. And that is Brian De Palma right there. My other one that I said there was a tie, and maybe this is just affection for me, but it's Carlito's Way. It's the train chase and the chase through Grand Central Station. That gets me every damn time. I am on the edge of my seat watching it, and I know how it's going to end. And I think, how can Brian De Palma tell us where this is going to end and then make this suspenseful scene where, again, we're cornering, we're pivoting, we're spinning, we're going down the escalator, we're hot, oh my gosh, and it just goes on and on until it's like you're left like a puddle of sweat in your seat watching that sequence, even though you know how it's going to end. And again, I just think that is also an absolutely brilliant sequence. I did watch Carlito's Way with my son. He liked that very much, and he pointed to that sequence. He was very amused by the fact that they picked a sort of heavy set gangster to be pursuing Carlito. At one point, he's having some trouble keeping up, and so again, it tells you a little bit about the sophistication of Brian De Palma, that he's juggling all of these elements. I mean, it's life or death, but we also have this little humor about this guy who's sweating and can't quite keep up, and yet it's still intensely suspenseful. So for me, love the sequence in The Untouchables. I can't pick a specific shot, but I picked the sequence, and I also think the train chase at the climax of Carlito's Way, again, sort of not where you expect to have that kind of suspense, because you know the tragedy and how the story is going to end, but he does it anyway, and he does it brilliantly. So I love those two moments in De Palma films, and as long as I can teach film, I'll show that scene in The Untouchables to my students.
Two come to mind, and one of them is from The Untouchables, and it's obviously the staircase scene with the baby carriage going down and Andy Garcia and all that. And that scene, it's just so well constructed, and it's just so memorable. But I would have to pick, my top would probably be the elevator sequence in Dressed to Kill, where you see Michael Caine in the mirror and all that. That scene's fantastic.
No doubt.
I mean, I think that's probably it. I mean, it's just, that scene is so well shot, and I mean, it's graphic, but it's just, it's kind of in slow-mo, and it's just, you know what I'm saying? Like, and the music I just think that whole part works really well.
Oh my God, this is like, he is a visual master, right? He's one of the best shooters of all time. And he's got so many moments in all his movies that you could choose from, right? I mean, maybe except for Redacted, right? Or Wise Guys. There were two that really stood out to me when I went back and watched the films. One of them was very early. One of them, to me, is the shot where Sissy Spacek on the stage and it catches fire in the back, and without question it's not a CGI shot, so it's real. The costume she's wearing with all the blood all over her, the shock and terror that she's feeling with this fire coming up, and then she starts attacking everybody. Just the moment where she's kind of she's getting back at everybody, and all that fire is behind her, and I think at one point she comes out the door and the school's on fire. That is really powerful. It's it's not so much the dolly move or a crane shot or split diopter or anything. It's just the composition is so incredibly beautiful.
I mean, it's so iconic that, I mean, you see that and it's Carrie. I mean, it just like immediately.
And then the other shot that I have to mention as well, the low double close-up on Kevin Costner and Sean Connery inside that big, I think it's a church, and it's got that big dome art above them. And you're looking up at these two guys who are incredible actors, and they look great in the movie, and they're kind of leaning forward, and he's got this double close-up with that beautiful grand, which is very operatic, art ceiling that's like a dome.
Okay.
That close-up is incredible. I mean, it's insane. It's a beautiful shot.
I mean, we could go to Dress to Kill. You know, that's the obvious choice. Would be the elevator sequence in Dress to Kill. The baby carriage sequence at the end, well, not the end, but you know, towards the last quarter of Untouchables, and the train station. The train. You know, what's really suspenseful is that Carlito, even though we know he gets shot in the very beginning, him trying to make it to that train at the end. But that suspense is all over. I mean, you know, Casualties of War is just gut wrenching, and that music, you know, the music. He's a master. He's truly a master filmmaker, and he deserves a lot of respect. That's why I couldn't, even if the movie doesn't jive with me, I'm not going to sit there and slam him. I don't think you love movies if you're that type of person.
I would have to say, because I didn't think it caught me off guard, I would have to say the scene in Carlito's Way, when he's walking to the train, he's thinking he's scot-free. You know, you're watching, but you know something's not right. It's like something, you know, it's almost similar to that scene in Untouchables, where it's like, you know, that the subway, and you know, they're looking for him, and the woman's pushing the baby carriage. That too is one of the most suspenseful scenes as well. So I'll say that scene in Untouchables, but that scene in Carlito's Way, when you think he's scot-free, you're like, okay, and then boom. I think with Johnny from the Bronx, whatever his name, by John Leguizamo.
Benny from the Bronx.
Benny from the Bronx just pops up. You're just like, oh man, you think he's scot-free, like he's almost, and you're like, oh man. And even the beautiful shot where, you know, he's laying there and think about his life. You see, I think he looks at an image of palm trees, whatever, something like that. He's looking at something, and he's kind of just slipping away. And
That's a poster up on the wall.
Just, man,
Poster.
right? It's a poster while he's watching. It's a great way of, you can tell that he's, you know, he's full, he's out of here. You know what I'm saying? He's kind of transitioning peacefully. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, I would say that scene in Untouchables, and then that scene in Carlito's Way. So I have two.
I had a really hard time answering that sort of separately from the last question. So let me just say, like, you know, the shot or sequence that I'm talking about, you know, in answer to my previous question where I mentioned the Untouchables and Carlito's Way, those are suspense sequences, for lack of a better word. That's what they are. So I think the most suspenseful sequences, I mean, I'd go back to the Untouchables and the carriage scene. I'd go back to Carlito's Way and the train station. I also think that scene in Dress to Kill in the elevator is unbearably suspenseful after the murder has occurred and Nancy Allen's character has arrived. You know, the elevator opens before her, and she's a prostitute, and she's with a John, and he sees like Angie Dickinson bloodied on the floor of the elevator and runs off, and she looks in and she sees Angie Dickinson on the floor, all bloody, reaching up, and she's reaching up slowly. And then we get the reflection shot, and you see that the killer's still there, and he's got the razor blade. And we see Nancy Allen's, and again, it's incredibly suspenseful. I'm like, what is she going to do? Is she going to get stabbed? Is she not going to get stabbed? And then it goes off on the crazy tangent where she grabs the razor, and it's like, why did you do that? Right? now you'll be framed for the crime. Don't you watch any movies? But you know, it's incredibly suspenseful because in that movie, at that point, we legitimately don't know what is going to happen. Now we know we're following the Psycho pattern where there's sort of no learning. The Janet Leigh, Angie Dickinson character, like they're our point of sympathy and identification, and then it's going to move to the next person. And in Psycho, it moved to Marion Crane's sister Lila. And Sam, and you know, after briefly landing on Arbogast for a while, and here, you know, it goes to Nancy Allen, but we're not sure it's going to go to her. Maybe it's going to go to the son next, and you know, so we're like, is she the next victim? Is she going to see the killer and run off? You know, what is her role going to be? And then really interestingly, especially, you know, I know there's some people who say that film is sort of misogynistic, which I don't agree with. I think it's actually interesting why she grabs the razor. It's like she takes fate into her own hand. She grabs it and does something. She has agency. I mean, I wouldn't be the thing I would do right there, because I don't want to be accused of a crime, but I get it from an abstract point of view. And so the torch is literally sort of passed there of identification from Angie Dickinson's hand reaching up. You know, the razor is there, and she grabs the razor, and it's like you've literally grabbed the baton of identification in the film. So I think that's a very suspenseful moment. So I would add that one in Dress to Kill to my list of suspenseful moments in Brian De Palma films.
That whole sequence with Carrie getting crowned prom queen, and you've got the bucket of blood above her, and yeah, I mean, like that whole sequence, it's just so nail biting. And then, you know, obviously it's so funny because that scene builds all this tension, and the release is her kind of killing everybody. You know, that's the release of almost all that tension, because you've wanted that this whole time, to see these people punished for all this crap that they're doing. So it's almost like once the bucket hits William Katt's head, knocks him out, then all of a sudden you know, the doors slam and all that stuff starts happening. And then, but everything leading up to that is just so tense.
That is like asking a huge.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of his specialty, right?
That
I
is
mean,
his specialty, right?
Yeah.
That's what he's known for. The Hitchcock, you know, some people think he rips off Hitchcock. I think he just is influenced by him. I thought about, like, there's so many different scenes. The drill scene in Body Double, any number of scenes in Dress to Kill, Angie Dickinson in the elevator, right? Robert De Niro is going to club that guy in the head, Al Capone in Untouchables. Sisters, the guy getting stabbed with the cake with Margot Kidder, when, you know, the guy's going to make out with her and all of a sudden he gets stabbed. And he does that like 5-minute split screen scene where the body's being hid. I mean, that's all suspense, right?
Yeah.
I think it's got to be the scene in Carrie where she's on the stage, Travolta and Nancy Allen are underneath with the rope, with the bucket. He does that long crane shot going up the rope. See the bucket, you see from above kind of moving a little bit. She's down under there. William Katt comes up on the stage. You got all the people on the audience. That is so brilliantly realized.
It is. Yeah.
The build up and the anticipation. Isn't that a great suspense scene?
And the you know, his use of film technique, like you were talking about before. I mean, he's doing split screens and just, you know, building suspense with editing, but then also in the scene, you know, in camera, you're seeing the suspense also. It's
right. It's the type of shots, the split shots, the split screen. I mean, I don't know if you could do anything better than that. That's like at the top of suspense. Wouldn't you agree?
It's fantastic.
That was made in 1975, and it holds up to today. Right now, it holds up. I just think that movie, that scene, it's a master class for any filmmaker that wants to learn how to do suspense. You got to say that he didn't take that scene from any Hitchcock movie. That was all De Palma.
Yeah, absolutely true.
So that's the one I would choose. And I still think that film is basically perfect. And I got to tell you, I had so much fun over the last 5 months when we kind of decided it was going to be De Palma back in like December. So I would say in January, I started rewatching this film. And at one point, like the only things I were watching was a De Palma film. You know, we're all busy doing jobs, whatever. So I don't watch a movie every night. So like if I watched a movie one week, it was a De Palma film. And I got to tell you, I had so much fun going back and revisiting. Some of them I had not seen in quite a long time, you know, 20 plus years, some of them.
Oh, wow.
The only one I watched twice for this research was Carlito's Way.
Just to be sure?
I loved it so much, I watched it a second time.